From Norco to Kentucky Route Zero, narrative adventure games are always a fascinating experience. They definitely don't always work, and some of them have the most eye-rolling stories I've ever witnessed. But when a good one hits, it hits hard. Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs was so cringe-inducing that my skeleton left my body and is off fighting adventurers in a dungeon somewhere. But that same developer wowed me with Everybody's Gone to the Rapture a few years later. Even somewhat pedestrian gameplay can be elevated with a good story, and that's somewhere around where I've landed with Phoenix Springs. Because the gameplay mechanics themselves are actually pretty cool, but the standard adventure game nonsense of repetitive backtracking threatens to pull the entire thing down. Thankfully, having a compelling story kept pulling me in instead, but not without stumbling a few times. Let's take a closer look. Iris is a reporter on a mission to find her brother Leo Dormer, and from the start of the game, that's kind of all you have to go on. After a dreamy moment of being on a train, you're awake in your apartment, rooting through files and checking your government-issued computer for anything that might help you find Leo. Right off the bat, you'll notice something different about Phoenix Springs compared to other point-and-click adventure games. There are no inventory items to speak of, not a single one in the entire game. Instead, you have a mind map full of various concepts and ideas that get added as you interact with the world. So, combining the idea of Leo Dormer with personal files and the terminal takes you to this abandoned house in a rundown neighborhood. When talking with NPCs, those same ideas and concepts become topics to discuss, though whether characters will help you will wildly vary, something I'll get into later. It's a cool gameplay system that will even reward you sometimes with special achievements if you use certain concepts on certain items. These interactions don't change anything about the game, but they do generate unique or interesting responses from Iris. Speaking of Iris, this game is told completely and solely from her perspective, which means you don't even hear another voice in the game. It's all narrated, somewhat coldly, and even interactions with others are summarized by Iris herself. This might make the game feel a little charmless, but it's all part of the atmosphere, and some of this also ties into the story. But still, given that this is the only talking character in the game and they're a reporter, you kind of wish that they had more to say about the things you're looking at or the people you're talking to. Especially when later characters talk more poetically or in the abstract, a little more befuddlement from Iris would have been nice. As you've seen, the art direction is very striking, opting for bold splashes of color against high-contrast whites and dark grays. Environments are as defined in light as they are absent in shadow, which adds to the dreamlike atmosphere of the game. Any close-up utilizes hand-drawn animation, and these moments sometimes appear in the middle of a line of dialogue for extra emphasis. That does make the use of 3D models for regular gameplay a little awkward though, because the changeover between a close-up drawing and a less detailed 3D model is very obvious, even with the attempt at keeping the model's animations on 3s and 4s. It can also be difficult to find certain exits or entrances in the darkness. Can you find the door to the house here? I just had to wheel the cursor around until it found the hotspot. So, even though the art direction is cool and enhances the experience and the storytelling, it sometimes gets in the way of that experience. The performance on my laptop also began absolutely tanking after a while, even after turning the settings down, and I had to switch to the desktop for it to run at a steady frame rate. This is unfortunately how I discovered that despite Steam's claim of cloud save support, the game doesn't actually save your game in the cloud, so I had to manually move my files over from one computer to the other. I'm honestly kinda baffled by this. As far as I'm aware, Steam's cloud save support just needs you to put in the location of the save file, and it is a single file, so how did they screw this up? I'll get one last negative out of the way before getting back to the story, and it's that the game can't quite escape the curse of adventure game design. While it's true that there's no inventory and pixel hunting isn't a concern, you still have a ton of backtracking to do, trying to figure out which person you need to talk to next, or where you'll need to make the one single combination of idea and hotspot to progress. This can get really frustrating at times because there are points in the story where you only have access to a couple of concepts in your mind map to work with, and it can be tedious to go through every single screen to check if there's a character you need to interact with or someone new has shown up. Alright, with that out of the way, I want to talk about the story because it's quite captivating and open to interpretation. So if you want to avoid spoilers, go to this timestamp because I'm going to talk about this plot in its entirety and what I and other people think it means. In the rundown neighborhood, Iris catches a lead that takes her to this university that Leo taught at as a professor of bioethics. The setting of the game is sort of hinted at around the boundaries, but there's definitely sci-fi dystopian aspects to the world, like the authoritarian control, this weird robotic plant a kid is playing with, an energy curfew, and weird technologies that are just a bit past our present. Leo's written a couple of books about the ethics of hacking your own body, as well as various mythical figures and how they relate to present-day situations, one of which is Panoptus, a mythical figure who wished for eternal life but forgot to ask for eternal youth. This will play in heavily to the late game. You arrive at his heavily fortified house to find that he's shut himself off in a panic room after receiving death threats. We're never told who the threats are from, but it was convincing enough that he wiped as much of his computer files as he could. His bedroom doesn't even have a bed, but a wheelchair and some sort of stasis pod suggesting he's fallen on poor health. Now, I'm not entirely sure if you can find the password to the panic room panel, but if you can't, you're asked security questions that Iris can answer with enough investigation of the house. And with that, you find Leo, huddled over and very old. Wait, wasn't Leo supposed to be Iris's younger brother? He begs Iris not to go to Phoenix Springs, but the next thing we know, she's back on that train from the beginning of the game, but seemingly for real this time. Okay, sorry, that probably was a little confusing and a bit out of nowhere. There are the occasional sudden bursts of story. Hold on, let me see if I can explain this better. Just give me a second to think. From Perfect Tides to The Dream Machine, narrative adventure games are always a fascinating experience. They definitely don't always work, and some of them have the most eye-rolling stories I've ever witnessed, but when a good one hits, it hits heavy. Alfred Hitchcock Vertigo was such a categorical mess that it was designated a Euclid-class object by the SCP. But the same developer really impressed me with the Black Sad game a few years earlier. Even somewhat basic gameplay can be elevated with a good story, and that's kinda where I've landed with Phoenix Springs. Because the gameplay mechanics themselves are actually pretty neat, but the standard adventure game nonsense of trying everything on everything else threatens to pull the entire thing down. Thankfully, having a compelling story kept pulling me in instead, but not without stumbling a few times. Let's take a look. Iris is a reporter looking for her brother, Leo, and after a few minutes of being on a train, she's found herself in this seemingly endless desert expanse. The train itself has no conductor to speak of, it's entirely pre-programmed. The train station is almost completely eroded away with an incoherent map, and other than a ladder that leads to this vantage point with a rocking chair and an antique radio, that's kind of all there is. You might be compelled to travel back across the train tracks, but they don't lead anywhere. All there is to do is to talk to this boy at the station that seems irritated that you're even talking to him. He talks about leaving and wanting to go to the sea, and when you ask him about Leo, all you find out is that someone named the Crying One knows something about him and to look for the 101. You might think this is a radio frequency, but it's not. It's actually the structure of rocks on this screen, which leads Iris to the oasis that will be wandering around for the rest of the game. This oasis is Phoenix Springs, and its inhabitants are strange. No matter who you talk to, nobody seems to want to give Iris a straight answer about anything, primarily lost in their own insular rambling. One guy just talks about how great stretching is, while another discusses their time as an office drone. Sequestered in one of the many identical red log cabins is a crying woman who may or may not remember Leo but seems to have lost their memory. In fact, as you navigate around, you'll notice quite a bit of that going on. Nobody tells you their name, and some of them are just sorta lying around. The fruits are all going rotten, the flowers smell disgusting, and everything just reeks of decay. As Iris puts it,
I thought of these people as neighbors. They're isolated planets whose paths don't overlap.
Iris eventually helps the woman to recover some of her memory. Her name is Mason, a name given to her for her role in the community as a brick maker. She disagrees with Iris's description of her appearance, but before we can get full clarification on this, she is summoned away to a strange ritual in which Mason gets seemingly murdered in front of everyone. This is so shocking that Iris can't really handle it, and the next thing we know, she's in the water trying to shut everything out. Okay, sorry, that probably was a little confusing and felt a bit out of nowhere. There is a bit of occasional rapid escalation to the story. Hold on, let me see if I can explain this better. Just give me a second to think. From Heaven's Vault to Lacuna, narrative adventure games are cool. They don't always work, and some of them are bad, but when a good one hits, it's good. Sorry, I just have a lot of spinning plates here. Thomas Was Alone was a pretty good story platformer for its time, but the same developer released the Circular Duology, which was a really tight little narrative saga about robots that I still hold fondly. Even simple gameplay can be elevated with a good story, and Phoenix Springs is basically that. The gameplay mechanics are rad, but it's still got some bullshit in it. The story makes up for it though. Let's look. Iris is a reporter looking for Leo Dormer, a bioethicist who Iris has some sort of relation with. He's not doing very well, and Iris is trying to get Leo to come with her to Phoenix Springs, in the hopes that he can be rejuvenated there. But Leo wants nothing to do with it, warning her against going. Too bad, she's already on the train and hopeful to find that oasis. Although there's not exactly much to see at first. The only person to interact with is this guy smashing a radio to pieces and keeping you from seeing whatever is at the top of that ladder. Luckily, Iris is able to find her way into the oasis somehow through these funny stones. Random luck, I guess. This oasis is full of somewhat despondent individuals who have little interest in helping Iris or themselves. They're statues whose names or heads have either been defaced or just eroded away. But there is a boy in one cabin who seems almost helpful. His name is Baker, but he doesn't seem to have many memories of his life. If Iris can restore his memory, he will take Iris to the elevator that somehow exists inside of this burnt tree at the center of the oasis. Traveling around, Iris meets a weaver who seems to know a lot more about what's going on than she's willing to divulge. A guy by a tree talking about someone named the Silent One, and a musician who can somehow make music with her mind. Despite the musician's best efforts to teach Iris a melody that will unlock the Baker's memory, she keeps forgetting it on her way over. This may seem like a form of padding, but it actually has story significance. Eventually, by using the melody on Iris herself, she begins humming it, which allows her to memorize it long enough to share it to Baker, which is seemingly enough to unlock his memories. After being taken to the elevator, Iris and Baker travel to the underbelly of the oasis, where the truth of Phoenix Springs reveals itself, at least partially. You walk across a corridor full of empty stasis pods and an ominous-looking machine with a giant screen and a nearby terminal. This terminal summons people from the oasis to this small body of water, including a woman Baker knows named Mason. Well, Mason in some form. She doesn't seem like she's doing that hot, but regardless, Iris is somehow able to connect to Mason via the nearby headset, and if the trick of Phoenix Springs hasn't revealed itself to you yet, it should here. Iris sort of mind melds with Mason using the mind map to trigger memories within her. Through this, Iris needs to trigger past memories in order to figure out what Mason knows about Leo. We learn that Mason was at one point involved with someone known as Architect, until a flood at the job site caused Architect to have a near-fatal accident. Luckily, the Springs had a fantastic surgeon on hand, as well as other top men and women who contributed to rescuing the Architect's life. And also, Iris is there. Iris is there, and she's much older looking. Okay, what the hell is going on here? Well, I'll explain it in a second if my explanation hasn't already led you to the conclusion, but let's finish the game out. Iris decides that the best way to get to the bottom of the mystery about Leo Dormer and his role in Phoenix Springs is to get into the body of water and investigate her own memories with the headset. And from the perspective of the character, I understand the motivation for doing this, but as a consumer of sci-fi, sweet shit, this is not a very smart thing to do. Imagine if I did that with one of my videos. It'd probably be something like this. Narrative games are cool. Phoenix Springs is one of them. Look. You play Iris, a reporter investigating her own memories to find someone named Leo Dormer. Is he her brother, her grandfather, her professor from university? It's unclear. Caught in a loop, Iris makes the same trip to Leo's house, to the same train, to the same oasis, to the headset, and back again. In fact, none of this game was an objectively told story. From the very beginning, the title screen shows Iris in that body of water. When Mason is sacrificed in the ritual, she's in the body of water, desperately rewriting her own memory to leave her out next time. That apartment at the beginning is just a memory of a memory of a memory of a memory at this point. Features and details change, Leo's house number changes, the cabins are different, the vegetation is different, all flickering and shifting moments in time, each attempt to remember slightly altered. Like the residents of the Oasis, Iris has become singularly focused on a single facet of her life, while letting everything else fall to the wayside. The only thing that keeps her slightly more lucid than everyone else is her reporter's curiosity. But why are the residents like this? Well, we don't exactly know all of the true nature of the location, but this is just my own interpretation on the situation. I think that Phoenix Springs was a John Galt-esque fuck-off village for powerful people to be selected to live forever away from the rest of society. If we consider how fucked the regular world seems to be with its energy curfews and over-reliance on technology and authoritarian governments, a seemingly random oasis in the desert would definitely appeal to a bunch of rich libertarian know-it-alls. This oasis was possibly constructed with tons of money and resources, as it's multi-layered with a lot of technology underground. Somehow these people have discovered a way to rebirth themselves, and Mason is one such person undergoing the rebirth process, when we discover her in the machine, a process she's gone through many times as indicated by her refusal to believe Iris's description of her in the first loop of the game. Iris has definitely gone through this process as well, having lived a full life in the Oasis, witnessing and reporting on the architect's accident, and seemingly having some sort of newspaper for the village. Baker mentions that you've asked him about Leo Dormer before many times. The carpenter mentions not liking one of your articles, so time and age no longer seem to mean anything here. But if you recall the myth of Panoptis, having immortality doesn't mean invincibility. It's kind of like how freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. Everyone's minds are eroding just like the Oasis itself. One area features a broken bridge, a source of great significance for Mason, and across the way are some ruins. Well, those ruins were the job site that got the architect injured. It's possible that the society was more advanced at one point, and all of that progress is now inaccessible and inscrutable, its meaning lost to the villagers that have been reborn over and over. One person is writing a cryptic and nonsensical alphabet, and I imagine it wasn't always that cryptic. That ritual in front of the tree may at one point have been more of an orientation to the village that just devolved into a religious ritual, and the people of the Oasis are clinging to whatever memories they have left, while still stridently claiming that their life is better this way. And I'm not gonna judge, maybe for some of them it is, but when your fruit's gone all rotten and nobody's communicating with each other anymore, and some just sit in their house forever, it's hard not to think that this quasi-afterlife is a prison. In fact, Panoptis inspired the word panopticon, which refers to a central tower in a prison that surveils all of its prisoners without their knowledge. And truly this oasis is a prison. Baker wants to escape it, but he seemingly can't until we finally get to what is sort of an epilogue. In this epilogue, Iris is no longer on the train, no longer at the Oasis, but on a remote island with Baker and a nearby fisherman. Iris no longer recognizes Baker, but at least remembers in some sense that he got his wish to reach the sea. Is this truly freedom, however? Did they actually escape the springs? Is this just a visual representation of Iris succumbing to the same isolation as everyone else, but with one kindred connection to tether to? Did Baker remove the headset from Iris and use it himself to mind meld with her? Or did he remove the headset and then contact the fishermen to save them? If so, how many memory loops did Iris travel through before Baker saved her? Sort of a Xenos paradox situation here where to her, it may have felt like years or millennia, but in the real world was just a couple of hours. After a lengthy credit sequence, there's a button that says Rebirth, which takes you back to the title screen with the option to start the game over. So I don't know that either of them are actually free. The mind meld theory might make the most sense here, and unfortunately, after she gets reborn, Iris will inevitably make it back underground again and trap herself in her memories. This epilogue is left the most to the imagination of any part of the story, but you could definitely have a few different interpretations of it. There's a lot more to talk about as well, but I think I'll leave it there. Okay, that sounds good. Let me write that down. Okay, that sounds pretty good. I'll write that down. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll go with that. Alright, I have the rest of the review ready to go. Everyone left. Oh well. Obviously, I really like Phoenix Springs, but it's also a bit disappointing at the same time. The story is very cool, but I feel like the mind map mechanics weren't explored as fully as they could have been. There are several screens that are purely liminal, and despite Zoomer's love and/or fear of liminal spaces, I don't particularly care for them myself in point-and-click adventure games. If a screen doesn't have useful or interesting interactions, I find it kind of a waste. You also can't use concepts on other concepts, which could have been an interesting way to create more connections, though I kinda get why they did it this way, since at one point in the game you've got over a dozen to work with, and no one likes combining every single thing in their inventory with every single other thing. Unless there's a fun reaction to it, and like I said earlier in the video, Iris's reactions and descriptions are just not super vivid. Now, there's a narrative reason for that obviously, but I still think that a point-and-click adventure game without good prose or fun reactions is only half a game. The atmosphere and storytelling does make up for a lot of it, but not all of it. You have to live with the fact that there's going to be a bit of tedium, a bit of running back and forth, and some occasional confusing navigation. At the very least, you can double-click to run, though I'd sometimes have to do it several times just to get it to work. But like a lot of experiences, this one may someday play better in my memories, and I'll look upon it more kindly. Now, before I go, let's run through this one more time just to get it perfect. No, I'm kidding, please. I can't keep editing this video. I release you back into the wild. Thanks for putting up with this silly little experiment of a review video. I had fun making it, but I obviously went a bit overboard, and maybe I didn't do the greatest job of explaining all the story beats or connecting the dots like Iris would. That's all the more reason for you to give the game a try yourself. Next week, I'll be looking at Geist for the Nintendo GameCube, and I can now officially announce that the winners of the Patreon's Voters' Choice are Tail Concerto and Jumping Flash. So you can look forward to the Jumping Flash video in a couple of weeks, and Tail Concerto around the second week of December. If you want to participate in the next poll, you just have to be a member of my Patreon, and you don't even have to be a paying member to vote. But if you do want to drop a couple of bucks, you can see early videos and get your name in the credits. That's all for now, and until next time, you'll find me in another castle.